Many thanks to the British Council and the City of Warsaw for this invitation this evening to share insights into my artistic practice. Much of my recent work has involved working closely with a senior generation of artisans displaced within traditional industry based in Stoke-on-Trent, the historic centre of ceramic manufacture in the UK. It explores how globalisation in the last 3 decades has impacted upon indigenous knowledge and attempts to reactivate aspects of intangible heritage which remain endangered or obsolete within contemporary production. Situated between Manchester and Birmingham, the 6 towns that now constitute the city of Stoke-on-Trent, comprised of hundreds of relatively small factories with more than 2,000 kilns firing millions of products a year in the late 19th century. By 1938, half the regional workforce worked in pottery factories, with employment peaking to an estimated 79,000 people by 1948. To this day, Stoke-on-Trent continues to be affectionately known as the Potteries, one of the few British cities with a distinctive regional identity and heritage that remains synonymous with a particular industry. Yet during the last 3 decades, escalating global competition resulted in many companies in North Staffordshire struggling to adapt or compete in both domestic and export markets. Rapid changes in lifestyle preferences, together with increased global competition from East Asia in the 1990s, forced many key factories to outsource high volume and low to mid cost production to these developing economies, where energy and direct labour Staffordshire. This strategy, coupled with the advances of production technology, proved detrimental to a phenomenal concentration of human skills and knowledge in Stoke-on-Trent, to what was in 1991 a 22,000 strong workforce. From the late 1990s, these commonplace headlines, together with the physical effects of deindustrialisation, prompted the beginnings of what was to become an ongoing process to archive industrial transitions occurring across the 6 towns. These images were driven by a compulsion to highlight the ensuing effects of globalisation from an insider's perspective, whose personal and social ties have been intertwined within the area's histories of ceramic manufacture. Both my maternal and paternal ancestry were employed in the North Staffordshire potteries. From an early age, a familiarity of pottery terminology was brought about from my grandmother's lifelong employment in the industry, where she experienced numerous skilled and semi-skilled jobs. On the right-hand side is an image from 1859, a group of employees who'd served a total of 54 and a half years service with a family descendant, Moses Brownsword, on the left. Seated in the centre of the group is Francis Wedgwood, Josiah Wedgwood's grandson. As the industry remained a dominant employer in the late 1980s, it was perhaps inevitable that I would also follow a similar path. And at the age of 16, I was apprenticed at the Wedgwood factory, where I initially trained as a tableware modeller. This formative period was instrumental to my understanding and appreciation of the wealth of human dexterity that is transmitted from generation to generation within each division of labour, something which has continued to be cited throughout my creative practice. In 2003, an increasing awareness of the displacement of many industrial craft skills prompted my return to the Wedgwood factory to document these traditions as a key element of my doctoral research. Filmed during an intense period of economic restructuring in 2003, nearly 80 hours of raw footage was captured over 8 months, providing a unique insight into the haptic, tacit and material knowledge embedded within each person's craft. Alongside this documentation, I would also begin to salvage the clay detritus, residual from each process, as this ephemera made tangible many of the hidden human actions that accrued within each skill practice. Clay turn-ins, rejected wares and other inadvertent discard were gathered and fired to preserve the momentary imprints of the hand. Materials rescued via this process constituted the work salvage series, a spatial assemblage flanked with juxtaposing film loops that documented demonstrations of high craft skill against the dereliction and demolition of once prevalent sites of manufacture. The work set out to draw attention to the increasing disappearance of a diverse knowledge base and nuances of dexterity embedded in aspects of ceramic production held by a senior generation of personnel. These narratives were extended during the British Ceramics Biennial in 2013 as it opened up a series of site-specific commissions to respond to the former Spode factory. Gaining funding to support the project enabled me to collaborate with a small group of ex-pottery hand painters in the performative installation National Treasure. As many high-end skills are nowadays regarded as outmoded or economically unviable to accommodate today's rapid shifts in consumer trends, National Treasure involved the performance of threatened practices at a variety of loaded locations. Factories that survived the impact of global competition have in recent decades embraced factory tourism as a means to increase profit. What remained of a particular interest was how the reality of mass automation and outsourced production is in some instances obscured by marketing strategies that heighten the handcrafted. Through its subversion of factory tourism's model of the artisan on display, National Treasure's painters were set to work in a post-industrial context, amongst the wreckage and disorder of the former Spode factory. Separated behind glass as they ply their skills, the viewer is confronted with a situation that evokes both admiration and discomfort. Whilst in residence, artisans were instructed to paint on the backs of damaged and discarded plates found on site at the Spode factory, with imagery that aped at the 18th century ceramics romanticisation of British ruins. Yet the depiction of picturesque decay was not the objective. The spaces within the foot of the plates where a painter would traditionally sign their workmanship were instead graced with images documenting the ruination and post-industrial fallout of Stoke-on-Trent. Working within their own time structures for as much or as little as they liked, artisans would occupy the space intermittently, dissolving the hierarchical relationship between employer and employee. Each vacant but illuminated workspace, together with the residues of labour, extended metaphors surrounding the presence of absence within the work. Paradoxically, the delegation of this work itself became a form of outsourcing. However, when employing people and their skill as a raw material, the ethical implications of this process remained paramount. Artisans were hired at double their industrial rate of pay and informed explicitly of the ideas and their role and fully credited within the work. The opportunity to perform National Treasure in South Korea, a country which gives status to individuals with exceptional artistic ability as a means to preserve and nurture cultural heritage, provided a prestigious platform to raise greater awareness of Stoke-on-Trent's intangible heritage that remains in dire need for greater recognition and protection. In 2003, UNESCO implemented a convention to safeguard intangible cultural heritage. 172 countries have now endorsed this convention, effectively making intangible heritage part of their cultural policy, but the UK is still not one of them. As older tiers of highly specialised labour continued to diminish, there remains few apprenticeships to secure the effective transfer of this knowledge to future generations. The importance of documenting several of these endangered practices became the focus of Reapprentice, a project that set out to artistically reactivate the embodied knowledge of a group of former industry employees. To gain an intimate insight into the transmission and acquisition of this knowledge, in 2015 I apprenticed myself to 3 former ceramic industry artisans who were amongst the last of a generation of master practitioners in their respective fields. Through this hybrid archaeological ethnographic approach, the project set out to examine each craftsperson's internalised set of rules and operations in an attempt to illuminate aspects of human intelligence and ingenuity which are all too frequently overlooked. Each skill base was deconstructed to arrest a sequence of touch. Nuances of preparation, pace and timing, and repetitive movements were also made tangible through both object and film. Questioning many aspects of work which the artisans themselves took for granted facilitated detailed insights into know-how yielding a wealth of oral history which would otherwise lay dormant. Finding value in the active memory and former practices of those affected by industrial change, however, often provokes simple assumptions of nostalgia or an unchecked idealization of the past. Yet these first-hand recollections remain essential and enrich our understanding of industrial history. As the project evolved, I became more and more interested in the performative element of work and the spaces where dexterity and material knowledge intersect. In 2015, the Victoria and Albert Museum facilitated an opportunity for me to develop a live version of The Reapprenticed in their Raphael's Cartoons Gallery, which, set against the backdrop of the masterpieces of Renaissance art in this space, provided a perfect context for the performance of near-redundant and marginalised factory craft skills that were disrupted through a series of interventions to emphasise the sophistications of material and haptic knowledge. My restaging of this collective labour developed into the Factory Project, first shown at the Ashmolean Museum in 2016 and Incheon World Ceramic Centre in April 2017. For the exhibition, two artisans from Stoke-on-Trent, China flower maker Rita Floyd and mould maker James Adams, were invited to South Korea to present their former practices, bringing contrasting modes of ceramic manufacture live into the gallery space. The installation involved my re-navigation of the production line to disrupt and repurpose prescriptive skill as a means to attribute greater cultural value to particular knowledge sets and the people who still retain them. China flower making is one of the few methods of mass production that relies completely upon the dexterity of the hand. With the changing fashion and impact of globalization, this industry in Stoke-on-Trent has all but disappeared, with Rita Floyd being one of a handful of still practicing artisans who retain this skill. Throughout the factory performance, Rita provided an intimate space for the rhythmic intricacies of touch evident within her craft. Yet this point of passive spectator consumption is immediately disrupted by a simple instruction for Rita to discard whatever she makes, creating a linear deposit of waste forms in the gallery space. In Korea, I had the opportunity to work with intangible asset Kwan-Soo So, renowned for the continuation of many traditional forms of Korean ceramics. Through the collaboration, Kwan-Soo produced a series of partially formed moon jars, laden with the raw immediacy of touch. James Adams took these casually assembled components into a less revered mode of production, mould making, instrumental to the histories of ceramic manufacture in North Staffordshire, which paradoxically introduced the eradication of human touch through standardisation. The subtle collision of these two very distinct traditions attempted to renegotiate a sense of value to people and practices displaced through global economics and give them a stage for recognition on an international platform. After working in Korea, the Heritage Crafts Association published the Radcliffe Red List of Endangered Crafts, the first research of its kind in the UK. It highlights important aspects of the UK's collective intangible heritage to assess the current viability of traditional heritage crafts in the UK and identify those which are most at risk of disappearing. It lists endangered practices such as flint knapping to Sussex trug making, but the industrial crafts, particularly in relation to North Staffordshire ceramics production, continue to be unaccounted for, something which I'm currently addressing with the Heritage Crafts Association. Safeguarding this intangible cultural inheritance doesn't necessarily mean relegating these practices to the dogma of past traditions. One of the aims of my recent residency at the Victoria and Albert Museum was to explore ways in which traditional knowledge can be transmitted to new modes of thinking, expression and representation. Historic repositories that record, structure and convey know-how from factory production, such as pattern books and shape books, became a primary influence. As a starting point, I revisited North Staffordshire's early industrialisation and the artistic and technological advances that, and innovations that evolved out of this period of cultural plagiarism and assimilation. The need for greater proximity to work directly with these objects from this period beyond curatorial handling restrictions led me to purchase 18th and 19th century ceramics akin to those held at the V&A via online auction websites such as eBay. Nuances of casting, assembling, modelling and painting unique to ceramic production were sampled and deconstructed using both analogue and digital technologies. With this lo-fi form of exploration, imperfections of the digital glitch were embraced as a method to transform instead of replicate. At the end of the residency, one of the digitally manipulated patterns was engraved into a copper plate by former Spode master engraver Paul Holdway. In a live performance at the V&A, Holdway offered a rare opportunity to experience the nuances of an industrial craft, solved and practiced, where the intimate space of tool, action and matter were amplified through a live feed microscopic camera. Practices that have evolved through hundreds of years of ceramic industrialization represent so much more than just the making of something. The complex human networks, social bonds and pride forged by collective skill and knowledge are essential parts of our cultural inheritance, integral to the unique identity of places such as Stoke-on-Trent. Transmitting endangered artisanal knowledge through new ways of thinking is just a small contribution to ensure that these industrial crafts continue to be practiced, valued, and eventually safeguarded for the benefit of future generations.